Here's the right front brake drum that I had to remove to replace the spindle.
This is the left front wheel. I've decided I'm gonna paint these drums. The speedometer cable has already been pulled out. This one is the left-handed threaded one. So I turn it clockwise to loosen. There we go. Grab the bearing.
At this point I realized I have to back off the adjusters first to get the drums off.
Up on this side. I don't have to take this any farther apart. So the drum is off, and now we can paint them. Painted the front brake drums black, thinking that I will get the bearings out, clean them. I mean, that should be red, and it's sort of black, that grease. Seems like it got a lot of brake dust in there. That's weird, that race does not look round. That race does not look round at all. That's weird. How very strange. I do not like the shape of that bearing. The fact that the race is so distorted. It should be round. I mean, here's the new one in the package. It's perfectly round. And this is the one from the right. It has the same, basically the same pattern. Right there and across there, you can get to the back of the race.
So to get it out of the drum, you just pound it out with a punch.
That's what that looks like. And the race is on it. I mean, the inner bearing looks fine. It's supposed to look like that, not look like that.
Similarly, the outer race for the new bearing just gets pounded in.
Part of the way in. drum with the race. And here's the actual bearing. Oh, this doesn't look as bad. There and there is the back of the race, of the outer race, and so I'm going to pound that out again. There's the socket where the race goes. The inner bearing cleaned up. I decided to replace the outer bearings with new ones because the bearings were so distorted. That's the old ones. And that carrier, the roller carrier, is just kind of bent. And there was contamination. There was gray stuff all in the bearings on both ends, on both bearings. So what I suspect is that I got this too tight. And so I don't think it was too much too tight. I mean, it went a few thousand miles, but it was eating the bearings. If I spin the inner bearings, the bigger ones, around in its race, it's not as smooth. There's it's not quite flat spots, but just hesitations. Every time the wheel goes around, it's going to hit those flat spots, and I wonder if that bearing isn't going as well. I think I'm just going to swap out both inners and outers on the front. I don't like the way that's discolored. I don't think I like the way that race looks. Oh, yeah, look at those streaks. I got these sumbitches too tight. I got these too tight.
The tension I'm talking about is what holds the wheel on the spindle.
This is what the spindle and brake drum and bearing stack looks like when it's assembled in cross-section. Here's the steering knuckle, here's the center of the spindle, it's threaded out here. Bearing rollers are orange, and you can see they're sort of tilted. The races of the bearings are green. This is the brake drum in cross-section. The outer races are very firmly attached to the drum itself, and the rollers and the inner races are the unit. So you put this on, you fill up the bearings, and you fill this cavity with wheel bearing grease. You put the drum with the inner bearing over the spindle, and then you put in the outer bearing, and then you put the nut on. So the nut compresses the inner race of the outer bearing into the outer rollers, into the outer race of the outer bearing, which compresses into the brake drum, which compresses this race into these rollers, into this inner race, back to the spindle. So this nut compresses this whole stack from this direction, and then the tension gets taken by the steering knuckle in this direction. This nut has to have a very specific amount of tension on it. Too loose, and the drum will wobble in this direction. Too tight, and it'll happen. What happened to me is that these rollers will get ground up. So I put a little bit too much tension on them, and so the bearings only ran 5,000 miles. see the one on the left is dull and a little bit streaked. It's kind of, it's not real obvious, but when you've got one next to a good one. Yeah, I was grinding off the steel. That's what that powder was from. So, put this race in.
Now, both front drums are painted, have fresh bearings, and ready to go back on the car.
Beautiful.
So be sure to dig into those niggling problems to find out the root cause, work on your own vehicles if you can, and never stop figuring stuff out.